Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on this video. So today I wanted to talk about what's currently been happening in Kenya. For those who don't know, Kenyan people have been having a lot of protests over there. And this New York Times article goes more in depth as to why the people over there are fed up with their current government. This article is titled Behind the Deadly Unrest in Kenya, a Targeting and Painful National Debt. Kenya, the fastest growing economy in Africa, is on a brink of a fiscal calamity. Across Africa, nations are spending more on interest than on health or education. Before I start the article, I just want to say that Kenya is one of the African countries that are on my list for me to travel to, for me to, get my tourism on. So I really hope they get this together by the time I go to Kenya. It's not going to be anytime soon, but it's definitely one of my dream countries to go to. The article starts by saying, quote, "The immediate trigger for the raging protest that gripped Kenya's capital on Tuesday was a raft of proposed tax increases, additional shillings that ordinary citizens will owe their government. The underlying cause, though, are the billions of dollars their government owes its creditors." Kenya has the fastest growing economy in Africa and a vibrant business center, but its government is desperate to stave off default. The country's staggering $8 billion in domestic and foreign public debt accounts for nearly three-quarters of Kenya's entire economic output, according to a recent report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Interest payments alone are eating up to 27% of the revenue collected. So this is where the issue is when it comes to everyday citizens, and is that the president or the current Kenyan government owe this billions of money, like especially to the point where it overshadows the overall economy of the country. And that is a very scary position to be in, especially being one of the most developed countries in Africa, and how Kenya has been able to, be so big. Something that other African countries and other countries that have the same issues around the world haven't been able to. The Kenyan president, William Ruto, have promoted the tax bill as necessary to avoid defaulting on the country's debt. But the violent reaction to Parliament's approval prompted Mr. Ruto to abruptly reverse course on Wednesday and reject the legislation he had asked for. And I'm glad he did that. I'm glad he's listening to the people. Other world leaders would abruptly just pass this bill and practically force the citizens to pay it. Listening keenly to the people of Kenya, he said, "I will not sign the 2024 finance bill and it shall subsequently be withdrawn." He proposed a 14-day period of discussions to chart a new economic course. Okay, so at least he's trying to listen to the people. I'm not sure what else can he propose, given that this are really, really, really large numbers that he owes. And of course, raising taxes and stuff like that on the citizens may help him pay some of this debt. But like I said, the country most likely cannot afford to pay these taxes. Mr. Ruto's turnaround may have temporarily quieted protests, but it leaves the country's finances more precarious than before. Just 2 weeks ago, the International Monetary Fund and Kenyan authorities had reached an agreement on a package of comprehensive reforms and tax increases needed to get the country on a more stable financial footing. The policy review required that the IMF lends money to distressed nations, warned of a significant shortfall in tax collection and a deteriorating fiscal outlook. IMF lending to the troubled East African nation now totals $3.6 billion. The IMF is now lending money to Kenya for Kenya to be able to pay those debts. So it's even more debt. I don't know, this international companies and that are supposed to be aid for certain countries, they're usually not there for the right reasons, just like these other countries that are coming to invest in African countries. It's not always the great idea. And this might lead Kenya to be more in debt. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. I see that the president is trying his best to do the right thing, not only for the country, but he's trying to listen to the people and what else he could do to try to not have so much of that weight of that debt on the citizens. The type of debts that are causing misery in Kenya can be found across Africa. More than half the people on the continent live in countries that spend more on interest payments than they do on health or education. Exactly. And that's because a lot of the money that they get from these lenders, they spend it on infrastructure, which is great. It makes the country look amazing. It helps facilitate people that, live in poverty, that live in low income areas. However, if the money is not going to education, if the money is not going to health, if the money is not going to the local people, these people cannot afford the living or the now rising of the economy of the country. The global debt crisis is the relatively bland label used to describe the brutal loops of unsustainable borrowing and bailouts that have long ensnared developing nations. And like I said, I don't know how these other countries and these other organizations, international organizations, actually lend money to these countries when they know that these countries could probably not be able to pay off this debt on time or probably efficiently. Why would they even lend money to them? That's why a lot of these developing nations are still developing, because a lot of the money that they have, they spend it on interest and they spend it on paying up, what they borrowed and stuff like that. So they really don't keep their money. They really don't recoup. And that's why there's generations and generations and generations that are going to keep, unfortunately, living in developing nations, quote unquote. In Kenya's case, its government took out vast loans after a period of economic expansion in the early 2000s to cover the cost of infrastructure projects, including roads, railways, massive dams, and rural electrification, and that's great. It is important to invest in education. I always say this: education is the most important thing that a country can have. And I still feel like education should take a large percentage of the cost of everything. It is essential. It's just more important to me than everything else. Everything else comes second behind education. And while all of this is important, look at where Kenya is now, that is owing all this money still. And it's going to be even getting more complicated for these developing countries that are still trying to level up, are still trying to help their own people, but they get into these deals, they get into these connections with these other organizations and countries that it does not work in their favor, and they have a lot more to lose in these other countries. A lot of these world leaders need to think smarter and see other ways and to see the bigger picture, see the long-term results and the long-term effects that comes with deciding to borrow money for such organization or from such countries, because not all of them are going to have the best interest in your country. A lot of these bigger countries, they don't give a damn about what you got going on or how your people suffer. They just want to take your resources. That's all they care about. Finding a solution to the current debt trap that poor and middle income nations find themselves in is harder than ever. Thousands of creditors have replaced the handful of big banks in places like New York and London that used to handle most countries' foreign debt. One of the most consequential new players in China, which has been lending billions of dollars to governments in Africa and around the world. I made a video about China's interest in particularly in the Central African Republic and how they were banned. One of their mining companies were banned from the Central African Republic because they were doing illegal stuff. At the end of 2022, Kenya owed at least 6.7 billion to China. According to the IMF, it owed another 7.1 billion to bondholders, 3.8 billion to industrialized countries, 3.5 billion to the African Development Bank, and 1.9 billion to international commercial banks. In May, Mr. Ruto said he was confident that Kenyans will eventually come around to supporting his actions. I don't think so. He goes on to say, I have been very candid that I cannot continue to borrow money to pay salaries, he said in an interview. And I have explained to the people of Kenya that we have a choice either to borrow money or to collect our own taxes. So this is pretty much all of the article. I'm going to link the article down below so you guys could read it. And this is pretty much the cause as to why people are protesting over there.